And here we go, July 23 edition of PFT PM. This one is going to be a challenge for me for reasons unrelated to the fact that it's always a challenge for me to speak extemporaneously for anywhere from 30 to 45 to 75 minutes. I'm really tired. This would be one of the days where Chris Sims could say to me, "You look tired," and I would agree with him. I don't know what happened. Yesterday, I usually take a nap for about an hour. I have a rhythm of sleep an hour at some point in the afternoon, get 4 to 5 hours at night. Well, it gets screwed up when I don't have to get up at 6 a.m. So I realized yesterday I didn't need a nap. I had other things going on. I'd slept 8 hours the night before, Sunday into Monday. So I felt pretty good, but I figured I would wear down. And thanks in large part to the riveting Sunday ticket trial transcript, I ended up staying up until 2 a.m. and was wide awake at 6. And about 45 minutes to an hour ago, I felt the curtains starting to drop. And that's usually when I take a nap, whatever time of day it is. When I feel that, that feeling where it's just the world is starting to, it's like, I got to do this podcast. So I had a Red Bull, just Red Bull, nothing else, just Red Bull. Hopefully it will last long enough to get me through however long it takes me to talk about the topics for today. And I have them right here. I also have some other paperwork that'll become obvious later as to why I have it. I want to start with something that should shock no one who's been paying attention to this platform, whether it's PFT PM, PFT Live, ProFootballTalk.com. We've known it's coming. It all started back at the Scouting Combine. Remember? If you watched our interview with Browns GM Andrew Berry when they were proposing either 1 or 2 weeks to delay the trade deadline, and they initially proposed 2, Berry explained 1 week accounts for the 17th regular season game, and the second week is in anticipation of the 18th regular season game. And I was like, whoa, hey, I thought that wasn't a thing anymore. And I started talking to people in Indianapolis. They're like, oh, yeah, that's coming. Oh, yeah, they still want that. And they know how to do it. Just kind of gradually, inevitably talk about it. And now the union and the NFL having very, very high-level conversations about it. And Lloyd Howell, who's been the executive director for about a year now, and we don't know much about him because he hasn't really said much. And that whole process of how he got the job was so weird and non-transparent. And I don't know what he's going to be, how combative, how cooperative. Sounds like they're willing to go to 18 games. And what I've heard is a lot of the younger players just, they don't care. If we get paid more, we'll play another game. Let's go. It's football. I think one of the realities here is the looming possibility of the NFL having to come up with $14.1 billion in the Sunday ticket case, more games, more money. And even though the league hasn't said anything about this yet to the union, I think the union at some level is kind of bracing for, hey, when we were getting all that Sunday ticket money and the CBS and Fox money, you guys were getting half of it. Now we got to pay $14.1 billion back. You guys don't have to, but look at what it's going to do to the teams, $440 million per team. Look at what it's going to do going forward when we change the model. It could reduce revenues. You need to work with us here. And the easy way to work with them in lieu of giving money back is to say, fine, we'll go to 18 games. I suggested last week, screw it, just go to 20. Just go to the NFL now and say, we'll do 20 and here's all the stuff we want for 20. Because it's going to get to 20 eventually, presumably in my lifetime, or if I live long enough in my lifetime. Hopefully it'll be in my lifetime, but I feel like that's where we're going. So there are no accidents. There are no coincidences. When the commissioner talked about Pat McAfee, he knew damn well what he was saying. He was asked about it later and he tried to backpedal. This was the trial balloon, and the trial balloon did not go splat. The fans are fine with it. The media seems to be fine with it. The players, most importantly, are going to be fine with it. The problem with 18 games last time around was it was impossible to reconcile the issue of health and safety with more games. So instead of insisting on 18 in 2020, the most recent CBA, they went to 17. And now it's just a matter of time to go to 18. And you don't have to wait for the current CBA to expire. You can make any agreement you want at any time. And look, I think one of the ways the NFL makes back its money, you go to the networks and say, let's do new contracts. We're coming to you with 18 regular season games and probably a second bye. So it'll be a 20-week regular season instead of 18. Start on Labor Day and end on President's Day weekend until they go to 19 or 20 games. That's where it gets a little bit weird. Where do you add the games? Do you start the season earlier? Do you drag the season deeper into February and inevitably March? We'll see. But for now, get ready. It's just a question of when, not if, but when we see 18 games. And from the NFL's perspective, presumably, the sooner the better, because the sooner you're playing more games that count, the sooner you're feathering the nest that eventually is going to require $14.1 billion unless you prevail. Watch what the NFL is going to do. They're going to come up with all these ways to make more money, and then they're going to win the Sunday ticket case, and it's going to be even better. More super yachts for owners everywhere. Haason Reddick, the Jets pass rusher, isn't looking for a super yacht. He just wants a new contract. He's reportedly holding out. This should surprise no one. And this goes back to what we said after he didn't show up for the mandatory minicamp. Why would the Jets trade for a guy without doing a new contract on the way through the door? And we criticize the Jets for that, and it's fair criticism. You're taking a guy who's unhappy with his contract with his current team, and you're trading for him without doing the new contract. And we've criticized other teams for this. When the Seahawks traded with the Jets for Jamal Adams, do the new contract then. When Jalen Ramsey went from the Jaguars to the Rams, do the new contract then. When Laramie Tunsil went from the Dolphins to the Texans, do the new contract then. All the leverage goes to the player once the trade is done. Once you've invested draft capital and or players to get the guy, you got to keep the guy. You got to pay the guy. It's better to say to the guy who's disgruntled with his current team, we'll give you the life raft, life preserver, life saver, whatever that you're looking for. But we want you to do a contract on the way through the door. And it may not be everything that you want, but it's better than what your current team's giving you. I mean, if a team trades for Brandon Ayuk, I guarantee you on the way through the door, he's going to have a new contract, not some point later. That's when you should do it. And, you know, the Jets were putting out this idea through media that are inclined in exchange for access to just say whatever the Jets tell them. And that's not a criticism of the Jets. That's true of pretty much every team. Pretty much every team has at least one reporter who, in exchange for access, favorable treatment, cooperation, will say whatever you want them to say. The story was, well, the Jets had an understanding with Haason Reddick that he would show up and they would deal with it. Well, you know what? Those types of understandings aren't worth the paper they aren't printed on. They're completely unenforceable. The only thing that protects you is a written agreement that gives the player what he wants under terms that are palatable to the team, and everybody goes forward. So if we didn't already know this, the message to every team out there is don't trade for a guy who wants a new contract unless you give him a new contract. And if he doesn't like the offer, don't trade for him. Find your pass rusher somewhere else. So this is a mess for the Jets. We'll see how long it lasts. We'll see if it gets worked out. And this is the first real holdout. All the draft picks are signed. Jordan Love, as we discussed yesterday, is holding in. We'll see what some of these other disgruntled players do. But Reddick taking his stand as he did throughout the offseason program, not showing up for the New York Jets. Jamar Chase was one of the guys who would potentially hold out. He's present for the Cincinnati Bengals. And Mike Brown, the owner of the team, made it clear yesterday he's not getting a new contract this year. And you couple that with, I want to find the quote. Mike Brown was also discussing T. Higgins' status. T. Higgins is subject to the franchise tag. He's making $21.8 million this year. Said Mike Brown when discussing T. Higgins, the pie is not going to grow. I'll stop right there. Of course it's going to grow. The pie grows every single year. The pie never stops growing. The cap keeps going up and up and up. And it is for the team to figure out how to make it work. Brown also blamed their situation on the fact that they've got a quarterback who's making a significant amount of money. Disproportionate piece of the pie. When you have to pay the quarterback a big contract, that takes a disproportionate piece of the pie. Well, that applies to everybody. Other teams have quarterbacks who are taking, I don't know that it's disproportionate, and I doubt that Joe Burrow's cap number this year is disproportionate. This is just justification for, frankly, being cheap. And we thought the Bengals were past that. We thought once they realized, hey, we just kind of stumbled into a pretty good team here, thanks to having the first overall pick in 2019 or 2020, and refusing any potential trade overtures, even though it would have been smart to take at least a look at whatever the Dolphins are willing to do. No, this is our guy. And it worked. Burrow's great. Jamar Chase the next year, top 10 pick. He's great. You got to pay great players. Now, if Chase is fine with it, so be it. Last year, Justin Jefferson didn't get a new contract in Minnesota, but the Vikings at least tried. This is Mike Brown slamming the door for now on a new contract for Jamar Chase, telling him you have to play this fourth year of your rookie contract, period. We'll talk about it next year. And because Chase has shown up, it's so much harder to do anything about it as a player once you show up. I don't want to get into the weeds of the CBA. It's easier, as the CBA is written, to hold out than it is to show up and say, sorry, I'm out. I remember when, I think it was DeAndre Hopkins one year with the Texans, showed up and then left. And it was like, no, he didn't leave. Because they can, there's a way the dominoes fall, shut you down for the whole year if they want to. It's kind of an extreme option that doesn't really help the team, but it reminds the players who's boss. And sometimes the teams like to do that. And Mike Brown is essentially making it clear to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and everyone else who's boss, who controls the purse strings, even if the argument is disingenuous, and even if this makes it harder for the Bengals to hold a great team together in an effort to try to win Super Bowls. Because, look, there's salary cap, and then there's actual cash spending. I haven't done the research on this. I'd like to see how close to the cap the Bengals have been under the 2011 rookie wage scale and moving forward. Have they been spending to the cap? Have they been scrambling to get to the spending floor? This is a small market, lower revenue team that really up until a year or two ago didn't sell the naming rights to their stadium. This is a team that has the potential to be a high-end contender year in and year out. And I think this team is willing to say, we got Joe Burrow and will otherwise fill out the roster around him with these low-cost 4-year contract draft picks, 5 years if it's a first-rounder. And in Burrow, we trust. And if that means Jamar Chase leaves eventually, so be it. If that means T. Higgins leaves after 1 year of the franchise tag, so be it. And the Bengals, since the franchise tag was first put in place in the early 90s, they've only ever signed one franchise tag player to a new contract. That was Carl Pickens, and they cut him after 1 year. No player franchise tagged by the Bengals has been there for more than 1 year, although Michael Johnson came back later after he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But that franchise tag usually means that's your last year. T. Higgins, it's his last year. And for whatever reason, Jamar Chase is willing to play that game. Others wouldn't be willing to play that game, but Chase is. So I guess good for the Bengals this year, but it's a sign that it might be difficult for this team to be truly elite over the balance of Joe Burrow's career. And now if they have him signed up long-term, what's he going to do about it? What's he going to do? He could make his displeasure known, and he could have Mike Brown say to him, well, your contract's the problem, and he needs to be willing to push back and say, it's really not the problem you think it is. You're just using that as justification to be cheap with Jamar Chase and maybe other players who will be due for contracts, and the Bengals will say, we'll draft somebody else. And that player will be better than he might be elsewhere because he's playing with Joe Burrow. All right. It's time to pivot to the non-football docket. I remember when I first got into this business 24 years ago, I felt horribly inadequate because I had no journalism education, training, or experience. as I learned more about how the NFL works, I realized, man, how do the people who are journalists who have no legal training or experience feel? And lately, it's been one after another. Sunday ticket case, we've talked about that at length. And I've crossed the 1,000-page barrier on the trial transcript. I still have 1,500 to go, but I feel like I'm getting there. And maybe I'll get there, before I croak. The Jerry Jones situation, I want to talk about that for a minute. There was an item from WFAA about day one of his trial. And he's not on trial. He's become the plaintiff. He's suing Alexandra Davis, his alleged daughter, and her mother, Cynthia Davis, for breaching the contract signed in 1998 that provided a significant amount of money for her care and feeding and upbringing. There was a confidentiality clause in that agreement that no one's allowed to talk about it. And I have a copy of the agreement. It's very lengthy. It's very detailed. And the argument is that by filing a lawsuit in 2022 by which Alexandra Davis wanted to simply prove that Jerry Jones is her father, that breaches the contract. And as we reported last week, the lawyers representing Cynthia Davis and Alexandra Davis say that Jones wants $1.6 million, the money he spent defending the case. That's what he's trying to get. And the thing that bothers me about this more than anything else, and I know he's got every right to enforce the contract. I understand that. But why? I mean, I'm 59 and my reaction to something like that would be, life's too short. You get me on the wrong side of 80, life's way too short to screw around with something like that. And it's not like it's going to undo anything that's happened. Like, what about this outcome is going to help you in your remaining years? You have a child, and look, I know he hasn't admitted it yet. He's been required to submit to a DNA test. The case where that happened is pending on appeal. But when you read the agreement, it's pretty damn clear he's her father, because there's a provision in there where he agrees to provide medical information about himself as needed for medical care for Alexandra Davis. Why would that even be pertinent if there wasn't that immediate family medical history relationship that could help her based upon whatever illness she might have developed while she was growing up? So it's pretty damn clear he's her father. And it's sad when you think about it. And I understand he was married at the time. It was 28 years ago. You have a child. It just would be nice if parents and their children had productive, properly functioning relationships. This is a dysfunctional mess. It's abnormal what's happening here. And, one of the arguments, and I'll defer to the details in the item we posted because it sounds like a lot happened on Monday in this trial. And Jerry Jones hadn't even testified yet. He's due to testify Tuesday. I have a feeling we're going to be talking on Wednesday's PFT PM about the stuff Jerry says on the witness stand on Tuesday. But Cynthia Davis, the mother of Alexandra Davis, testified at a Christmas party in 2019. Jerry Jones came over to Cynthia Davis and a friend and acknowledged that he has two daughters, Charlotte Jones and Alexandra Davis. What's the violation of the agreement? That's a violation of the agreement. And Jerry Jones' lawyers respond saying, well, did you declare it was a violation? Did you seek damages for breach? Well, that doesn't matter. If he said it, he said it. And I don't know if the friend is going to testify, but you at least have enough that a jury could say, yeah, we believe her. We believe that she didn't make that up. So Jerry Jones has already violated the contract, and it undermines his claim that there's a secret that's being kept here, and somebody else is the one who let it out of the bag, if he'd been letting it out of the bag previously. And my guess is, based on what I know of Jerry Jones, he's probably said a few things about it over the last 28 years. And it wasn't until he got sued and got forced to submit to a DNA test, even though he still managed to avoid it, and then got sued again for defamation. That was when he finally filed the breach of contract case. He didn't file it in response to the original lawsuit seeking to establish paternity. He filed it after Alexandra Davis sued him and others for defamation, because her argument was, in response to her original lawsuit, they went after her. like the Cardinals went after Terry McDonough. Not to the same extent, and that case was ultimately dismissed, but the counterclaim filed by Jerry Jones survives. He's the plaintiff now. And this is just, I think, unfortunate. I'd like to think, and maybe the case is that really rich people have no one who would come to them and say, this probably isn't a good idea. This probably isn't the smartest thing to do. And it could be that Jerry's getting a push from Mrs. Jones because, look, it makes the family look bad. It creates issues. And even if she knew about it, it's out there in the public. Let's teach them a lesson for violating the terms of this agreement and dragging us through the mud, yada, yada, yada. I just think that the best move would have been to let this go, to not try to prove a point, try to hold 1.6 million over these two folks and just move on. And ultimately, as he enters, the final hole or two of his life's 18-hole golf course, I'd like to think that you find a way to mend fences with family. I think we all can agree that there's nothing more important than family. And it always saddens me when I see fractured families because that's kind of all we have. We're all in this alone. We're born alone, we die alone, we live alone, but the people around us, the family around us is what protects us and nourishes us and gives us a reason to keep going. It's sad to me. It's just sad. All the money in the world doesn't matter if you've got this kind of a mess that you've made and you're exacerbating by suing your own daughter. And look, I don't know why it's not a bigger deal. I don't know why when the Cowboys, who are always a big deal about anything and everything that happens, when something like this comes up, it's not a big deal. Remember the issue from a couple of years ago with Rich Dalrymple, the former PR chief with the Cowboys, and there was the issue about cheerleaders in the dressing room, and that seemed like a pretty big deal. And anything the Cowboys do is a pretty big deal. But for some reason, certain things the Cowboys are involved in don't get the same attention. And it's just kind of odd to me that more people aren't paying attention to this, just like more people weren't paying attention to the thing that happened a few years ago that was covered and largely forgotten. One more issue before I answer some of your questions and take a long-ass nap. We haven't talked about the Brian Flores case in a while, and for good reason. Not much has been happening. It's an illustration of how slowly civil litigation can move through the court system. He filed on February 1 of 2022. Here we are, July 23 of 2024, and the case is still stuck at square one. What claims are going to be arbitrated? What claims aren't going to be arbitrated? There's an appeal pending now before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. We've talked about the Ninth Circuit recently. That's California. Second Circuit is New York and surrounding states. And what happened is, in a nutshell, when the trial court ruled on Brian Flores' case, some of his claims have to go to arbitration, the secret rigged kangaroo court of Roger Goodell. Some of the claims can be pursued in court. For example, the claim against the Broncos for wrongful failure to hire him, claim against the Giants for wrongful failure to hire him, claim against the Texans for failure to hire him after he had filed his lawsuit, and also claims directly against the NFL. The only team that got out of this was the Dolphins because there was an arbitration clause in his agreement forcing him into the secret rigged kangaroo court where good luck getting a fair shake, and even if you win, you're not going to win nearly as much as you would have won in the actual court system. Again, Terry McDonough, $3 million, probably would have been $60 million or more if it had been in an actual court system. So here's where it stands. The NFL is appealing the decision of the trial court judge to allow Brian Flores to escape arbitration. And one of the arguments, and we wrote about this yesterday, but it's important because finally, a high-level federal court is looking at this question of whether the commissioner should be permitted to be the person who handles the arbitration. Across the country, big companies use arbitration clauses that involve a third party who handles the arbitration, the American Arbitration Association, and there are others. Now, some would say those companies are still kind of biased because they get business from these companies, so they know where their bread's buttered. And if the American Arbitration Association isn't giving insert name of major company the kind of decisions it's looking for, they'll find some other arbitration company that will be the default. Regardless, it's less unfair than having the CEO of the company that wants all of its claims to go to arbitration be the one who resolves the case. That issue finally is being taken up. And a group of a dozen law professors who specialize in dispute resolution have issued a brief. It's called Amicus Curiae. It's friend of the court brief, where they're saying, hey, even though we're not directly involved in this case, we think that this could be a mess for the administration of justice and specifically credibility of the arbitration process if you allow this to stand. Because the fear is if the NFL ultimately gets a pass to do this, others are going to do the same thing. So that's the important issue that's pending. But I have become aware in the process of reviewing the briefs. And again, I've been reading way too much crap. Legal gobbledygook mumbo jumbo. I know how to kind of fast forward through it and get to the good stuff. I saw something though yesterday. And this is a little surprising, but I guess it isn't. One of the arguments the NFL has made, Brian Flores, after he was fired by the Dolphins, ended up getting a job with the Steelers, which was admirable. At a time when Brian Flores makes himself into a pariah by suing Club Oligarch, the company that has 32 independent companies underneath it. It's a very small industry. He's taken on the NFL, the Dolphins, the Giants, and the Broncos right out of the gates, followed by the claim against the Texans. It's going to be frowned upon to give Brian Flores a job, but the Steelers did, to their credit. And also to their credit, when it was time for Brian Flores to sign a contract that included an arbitration clause, the Steelers agreed that nothing in the new agreement would affect his pending lawsuit. Now, it wasn't in the agreement itself. It was an email that was sent by our good friend Omar Khan to Brian Flores' lawyers, and the email, and this is publicly filed, this isn't anything secret or confidential. This employment agreement is not intended, Omar Khan writes, to infringe in any way on the lawsuit filed by Coach Flores in February 2022, which is currently pending. The club and Coach Flores do not intend for anything in this employment agreement to infringe upon his right to prosecute the pending lawsuit. Let me read that again. The club and Coach Flores do not intend for anything in this employment agreement to infringe upon his right to prosecute the pending lawsuit, and neither does this agreement infringe upon the rights of the NFL or any party to the lawsuit in asserting any defenses to the lawsuit. Lawsuit, not arbitration, lawsuit. Nothing infringes his ability to prosecute the pending lawsuit. One of the arguments the NFL has made in the Brian Flores case is that the arbitration clause in his contract with the Steelers requires him to arbitrate all of his claims, despite that email. I asked the Steelers for comment yesterday because I wasn't sure they even knew about it because they're not part of the case. The Steelers had no comment. I got to wonder what Omar Khan thinks. I got to wonder what Mike Tomlin thinks of the NFL defying the express terms, defying and ignoring the intent as articulated by Omar Khan, that nothing in that contract would be used against Brian Flores' ability to prosecute his lawsuit as an argument that all of his claims should go to arbitration by virtue of the arbitration clause in that contract. I wonder what Art Rooney thinks. That's why I contacted the Steelers. It's like, you guys know what the NFL's doing with the promise you made to Brian Flores? Do you know they're ignoring that and they're making the argument that the Steelers contract is basically the silver bullet that sends everything to arbitration. Again, no comment from the Steelers. But my guess is Omar Khan, pissed. Mike Tomlin, very pissed. Art Rooney, and Art Rooney typically gives interviews to Steelers.com. I got a feeling, let me just predict, let me go out on a limb here and say, the next time he gives an exclusive interview to the website he owns and operates, the interviewer isn't going to say, so, Art, let me get your thoughts on the NFL ignoring your wishes and using against Brian Flores the contract he signed with you to try to force his claims into arbitration. It's something. And there's another weird, meandering way that this all came to light. Let me summarize. The NFL first made the argument by submitting a copy of the contract between Flores and the Steelers without proof that Roger Goodell approved of the contract. The commissioner is required to sign off on every coaching contract at every level for every team, which, we've talked recently about antitrust violations hiding in plain sight. The idea that the league has to approve of every contract entered into between the 32 independent businesses and their employees, that's kind of an antitrust violation that's just kind of sitting there that nobody's ever going to do anything about. But because the agreement that was submitted by the league didn't show Roger Goodell's signature, the judge refused to even consider the argument. So then after the judge ruled, the NFL filed a motion for reconsideration saying, oh, look, we found the signed copy. And the judge said, no, it's too late. It's too late for that. So what's happening now on appeal is the NFL's asking the appeals court to send the case back to the judge, to require the judge to consider the arguments made by the NFL. And that's when the battle would be fully joined here that, hey, wait a minute. The Steelers said nothing in this contract is going to be used against your ability to prosecute this lawsuit. And look, maybe there's a legal argument to be made that helps the NFL here. But look, I've probably pissed off 345 Park Avenue as much as I ever have over the past few weeks. It's just basic right and wrong that we all learned or should have learned when we were kids. And I think we can all agree, people of reasonable mind, basic sense of good and bad, it's wrong to tell a guy that the club and the coach do not intend for anything in this employment agreement to infringe upon his right to prosecute his pending lawsuit, and then to use that contract as the thing that would send the entirety of the pending lawsuit to arbitration. Again, why do you hate the NFL? I don't hate the NFL. I love the NFL. And I was indoctrinated by the voice of John Facenda. And I hold the NFL to the standard, to the pedestal on which the NFL perched itself to get a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid like me fascinated by it in the early 1970s. And I expect to see the people who are the stewards currently of the National Football League to act in accordance with that image that was projected by NFL films to lure me in and to get a lifetime of passion out of me and to get me to the point where I spend 90% of my life promoting their product. All right, let's answer a few questions here before we wrap this up and I take a long ass nap. Hopefully not a permanent nap. Hopefully I'll wake up. Hopefully it's just, the over-under is an hour and a half, and hopefully it doesn't go way over. All right, here we go. What do we got? PFT PM Posse. How long until the Texans replace the Cowboys as Texas's #1 NFL franchise? Seems to be fairly close already. I remember there was a time where there was some heat between the Texans and the Cowboys, and the Cowboys kind of looked down on the Texans. They kind of looked down on everybody. And it's amazing that Cowboys have maintained their lofty perch nationwide when they haven't been to a conference championship game since 1995. And I think that it turns if the Texans get to a conference championship game before the Cowboys. I think that's when it turns. And maybe that happens this year. PFTPM Posse, did the 2 bye weeks in 1993 fail because each bye was actually 2 weeks long for the team? Meaning They were playing Sundays to Sunday. There was no Thursday. There was no other windows. It was just you're off, and you're off for 14 days. So many games are now played on non-Sundays now. Does schedule dilution become a non-factor? And just by way of refresher, the networks hated the 2-bye-week season of 1993 because it diluted the Sundays. There were 28 teams at the time. There are now 32. But the Sunday schedule was already being diluted by the periodic Monday night doubleheader or 2 games being played at the same time, the Thursday night games. We already had Sunday night in 1993. So it's going to be more delicate to say 2 bye weeks, but I think the networks go along with it because of the potency of standalone NFL games. More windows, more people watching. So I just think with 4 more teams and just the basic fact that nothing can compare to the NFL by way of gathering a massive audience to watch a game at any given time, the networks would probably get over the idea of having weeks arguably diluted because they're going to come out of it with 20 regular season weeks instead of 18. Here's a good question from King36. Do you think any players will wear the concussion shell over their helmets for regular season games? Remember last year when the NFL was touting the benefits in the preseason of that big clunky, looks like sound insulation or inside out egg cartons that they wear over their helmets? How much safer the players are? Well, okay, can they wear it during games? Well, no. Now, the NFL, and this kind of quietly came out during the offseason, now the players are allowed to wear it if they want to. We'll see. Look, the NFL is concerned, and I think a lot of fans, it's a very visual sport, played in a very visual medium. Look at all the helmets, all the uniforms. Look at how great the game looks on TV. It's one of the reasons why it's so popular. It looks great on TV. There will be fans who complain if there are players out there wearing this big, giant, great kazoo contraption, and I don't know how you can properly make it look like a helmet. What do you do? Do you just apply the decals over the undulated external padding? I don't know. But I just wonder at the end of the day if no player will do it. Because players want to look good. And you don't look good in the estimation of most, if not all, players if you're wearing that thing when you're out there on the field. So it'll be interesting to see if it happens. Mr. Palmerson, what process does the league and the NFLPA have to go through to start an 18-game season? It's very simple. They just sit down and agree to it. It's bargaining. That's what happens when you have a league and a union. You bargain. The league wants 18 games. Okay, fine. What's in it for us? And they work to an agreement. And they can do it at any time. It doesn't matter when the CBA expires. They can do it at any time. They can reach any agreement they want. It can be good for one side. It can be bad for both sides. It can be good for both sides. It can be a win-win, as every agreement should be. When you're in a situation like this, where it's a symbiotic relationship, it's give and take, you never want one side to feel like it got screwed. You want everybody to feel like they've been treated fairly. Rob, if the Sunday ticket trial ends up costing the NFL $14 to $21 billion, is that enough for the league to look into replacing Roger Goodell as commissioner, or has he made enough of an impact during his tenure to weather the storm? The appeal process is going to carry Roger Goodell out to the conclusion of his current contract. And maybe by then, the owners won't want to offer him an extension if they know they're going to have to pay the $14 billion. But look, this wasn't his mess. This is what the owners wanted to do. Sunday Ticket was something that started in 1994. They've known for 30 years this thing has a potential antitrust component to it. And they made a shitload of money over the last 30 years. Yeah, they may have to give $14.1 billion of it back, but I don't think it really sticks to Goodell. And look, I can only imagine there has been some difficult conversation involving the commissioner, Jeff Pash, outside counsel, certain owners, as to how we got to the point where we potentially have to pay $14.1 billion. Now, for now, they're circling the wagons. And this is what happens. I lived this life. When you get a bad outcome as a corporate party, and you've got a big law firm that handled the case, and people are trying to figure out why. What happens is a consensus emerges that it's the judge's fault. It's the jury's fault. The plaintiffs were cheating. I mean, haven't we seen that play out in a non-legal setting in recent years? If you lose, it's not because of anything you did. Somebody else cheated. Somebody else was dumb. Somebody else was corrupt. It can never be, we violated the law. We didn't try a very good case. We had a chance to settle, but we poo-pooed it. We're not worried about this. We'll be fine. So I think for now, they're in full-blown, we can still win this. And I think they've gotten themselves convinced. It becomes an echo chamber. I've been in this place. And this is why it's so important for the lawyers to be willing to say to the executives, wait a minute. Hang on a second. You need to hear this. The problem is there are plenty of executives that surround themselves, and I'm not saying that that's the case here. There are plenty of executives who surround themselves with people who say what they want to hear. And my concern for the NFL to date and moving forward, there's too much of what someone wants to hear and not enough of this is how we end up getting screwed. And we can blame anyone else we want, but at the end of the day, the $14.1 billion plus interest plus attorney's fees is going to come out of our pockets. Gritty get litty. Do you think players have just accepted an 18-game season already? Do you think there will be a major fight over it with the union? I think that 18 games is happening. I think that the current union management, when D. Smith, the former executive director of the NFLPA, was asked about 18 games years ago, it was no effing way. Not a direct quote, but no way, not doing it. You've got Lloyd Howell entertaining it. And Jalen Reeves-Maben, the NFLPA president, when he was asked about it after it bubbled up with the Andrew Berry comments to us at the scouting combine, we'll discuss that at the appropriate time. Not no way. Players want to do it. Young players are willing to do it. They get paid more money to do it. So I think they'll work it out, especially if they can get larger rosters, second bye week, revamp the offseason program in some way to put less strain on the players. A lot of stuff that won't cost the owners a whole lot of money. That's the best thing you can do as the union. The NFL has a proposal that results in more money for everyone, and the players are asking for all sorts of stuff that doesn't cost the owners a lot of money. That's the way to get to an agreement, and I think they will. All right, let me see what else we have here. This is another 18-game season question from Colin Adams. You recently spoke about a second bye week. Why would either side be against that? That would allow for more primetime games, and the rest sounds like a win for everyone, including the fans. Again, the networks don't like it, and the NFL would have to be willing to either have Pro Bowl weekend happen on President's Day weekend and the Super Bowl a week later, or start the season Labor Day weekend. And they got away from Labor Day weekend because viewership is typically down then. People aren't home. They're at the beach. They're at the picnic. They're still on vacation. They're not sitting in front of the TV. What's changed now is we're all carrying our TV around everywhere we go. And I think the NFL's popularity is at the point where wherever you are, if that's the weekend that football starts, people will watch. And they could do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sorry, college football, Sunday, Monday. A 5-day primetime football extravaganza to start the season. People would be all in for that, I believe. Jordan Davey, why not go for a 20-game season now and have 2 buys with the NFLPA asking for no franchise tags and 50-year options? Do you think the NFL would listen to that? The NFL is never going to up the franchise tag. The NFL would love, I think, to do 20 games. They're never giving up the franchise tag. But maybe there's a deal to be done there. And I've said, let's go ahead and go to 20. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's not peel it off slowly. Let's just go to 20. Let's do it. You're going to get there anyway. Let's just go ahead and get to 20 games, max out the revenue, and we'll all know. There'll be no more issues about, hey, the record's good for now until they add another game. We got to put an asterisk on it. Let's just go to 20. That's where they're eventually going to be. Then we'll know all the records are what they are. But think about that. With a 20-game season, to get 1,000 rushing yards in a season, you have to average 50 a game. All right. Tyler Hergert, last question. Why isn't there a class action lawsuit for the people who didn't buy Sunday Ticket because it was too expensive? There's no damages. What are your damages? I didn't buy something because it was too expensive. So what did I lose? How do you turn that into dollars and cents? I think that's the problem. If there was a class to be pursued with that argument, it would have been part of the case that just went to trial. And there would have been a separate measure of damages for residential customers who did not get Sunday Ticket because they thought it was too expensive. I've said before, they are the uncompensated victims of this scheme to make it so expensive that only the most passionate fans who will gladly pay anything to watch their favorite team that doesn't play in the market where they live, those are the only plaintiffs. But the uncompensated victims are the ones who say, I'm just sorry, I can't afford it. I don't want a DirecTV dish, whatever reason, I'm just not doing it. I think those folks are out of luck as it relates to the legal system. But for those of us who happen to be covering the case and thinking about the case and talking about the case because people are interested in the case, even though most media outlets are ignoring it still to this day, yeah, people got screwed by this policy. Setting aside the antitrust violation, the $14.1 billion, people got screwed by this effort by the NFL to double dip, maximize the Sunday Ticket revenue, maximize the CBS and Fox revenue by ensuring that the price for Sunday Ticket was so high that only the most passionate fans would buy it. And those were the ones who got screwed the most. And those are the ones who may get a check at some point. And some of those folks are defending the NFL on social media. And I say to all those folks, are you going to tear up your check when it shows up, or are you going to cash it? And if you're going to do anything along the lines of taking the money, probably time to stop making the arguments supporting what the NFL did, because they took advantage of you. They took more of your money than they should have taken through an antitrust violation that allowed them to set this up. Because the argument is all 32 teams should have been competing with the various networks for the out-of-market packages, and we would have had a situation, and I got to wrap it up with this. But I was thinking about this earlier today. We would have had a situation where every game is on your cable or satellite provider at no extra charge. And I can't help but wonder, let's think about this alternate universe. CBS and Fox have the rights to the various markets. So in Pittsburgh, you're going to see a Steelers game on CBS or Fox. In Dallas, you're going to see the Cowboys game on CBS or Fox. In San Francisco, you're going to see the 49ers game. It's going to change by market, but CBS and Fox serve the local markets. And all the other games, the out-of-market games, ABC, NBC, ESPN, FS1, ESPN2, USA, NFL Network. If you would put every game on, let's say there's 9 games, and many weekends there are 9 games at 1 o'clock Eastern on a Sunday. You put them all on at the same time, and nobody has to pay anything extra. Do you think the ratings would go down or go up? Do you think the money would go down or go up? I think if they just made every game available, and really, you think about the popularity of the NFL right now. As I said earlier, nothing pulls together a live audience like professional football. So if you have from the hours of 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock Eastern on 18 Sundays in the fall, soon to be 20, maybe more, everywhere you turn, any game you want is there on your cable, satellite, or YouTube TV or equivalent streaming package where you've got all these channels. You can watch your favorite team. You can watch whatever game you think is the most interesting game of the weekend in that window. You can turn to another game if that game ends up boring you. You can do whatever you want. Wouldn't that draw more people in? As I said yesterday, 35 million people wanted to watch out-of-market games, and Sunday Ticket serves 2 to 3 million. Another NFL study showed the number was up to 75 million. I think the numbers, I think the audiences would be through the roof if every game was on TV. The money would go up and the audiences would go up. And I don't know why the NFL won't do that. I don't know if they're just being careful. And once that cat's out of the bag, there's no putting it back in. Could you imagine they do that for a year? And they're like, well, we're going back to Sunday Ticket where you got to pay $400 for it. That wouldn't fly. But I'd like to think that's one way out of this maze for the NFL. It can end up benefiting the fan and the league by getting every game on TV on a nationally available broadcast or cable channel. And I don't know why they would fight that. I'm trying to find out. I'm talking to some people who would know. Why won't the NFL just do that? And why does the NFL think it won't make more money and have even bigger ratings if it would just embrace? And they considered this. They called it the New Frontier Study. It came out in the Sunday Ticket trial. They considered it and decided not to do it. Why not do it? Why not make all those games available? Why make it scarce and then require your most ardent fans to overpay, and then you have these millions of people who are just stuck with, well, I'd like to watch the Saints game, but maybe I'll have highlights of it during the Steelers game. I'll just watch that game instead. All right, got to go. The Red Bull has not yet worn off. See, I'm going to be wired all day, and then I'm going to go to sleep late again tonight, and I'm going to wake up 4 hours later, and this cycle is just going to continue until I die. And at one point when I was talking about possibly going to sleep and not waking up, Kristen said, Dr. Doom, yes. The good news about this new platform we're using for PFT PM, it looks more like PFT Live. The better news is they can't put Dr. Doom over my face yet. But I have a feeling that's probably coming. It'll be the rejoin for August 12th. And that's when we're back. People keep asking, when are we going to be back for PFT Live? August 12th, the Monday after the Olympics. Last time they had the Olympics in the summertime, we actually shut down for a week to give all the folks who are working so hard on the Olympics a chance to regroup. Sorry to those folks in advance, but we're getting right back at it. Closing ceremony, Saturday or Sunday? PFT Live back Monday, August 12th. Until then, PFT PM every weekday. As long as I don't die, we'll keep doing it. Thanks as always for some of your time. We'll see you again on Wednesday. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.